two, one. We're live. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Happy Easter to those listening. We're gathered to discuss the Gospel of Matthew today, which we took some effort to plan it so that we could do that around Easter time. And I'm very happy we succeeded, unfortunately, without Michael, but he said he will be joining us for episode 10. So we're looking forward to that. The chapter today was called Love Your Enemies. All the readings for today were the Gospel of Matthew, if I'm not mistaken. And I think the author, Buzz, proposes that this Gospel could be written as well, read as well as war literature. Yeah. Can you help me a bit out with that, Aaron? I'm hearing myself
Well,
say it, but I can't really form the link right away.
so you have to imagine that against the Gospel of Mark, both Luke and Matthew are very much most likely written like because most people date Matthew even later than Bus does here. But they're most likely written after the very famous and fundamental and monumental destruction of the Jerusalem temple by the Roman armies. So you can imagine sort of how incredibly sort of apocalyptic that experience must have been like, you know.
Yeah.
And you can also imagine, you know, we've been reading Paul, we've been reading the Gospel of Mark, which also had the sense of that. Now there's this sense of like, you know, we don't know what will come, and now, you know, this happens.
Yeah.
So that means that they're in the midst of this, like, whoa, how do we respond to this? And
Also,
therefore, yeah,
go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead.
No. You were talking.
Well, no, I just wanted to say like that there's this difference that is argued by Bas, why it's not so much that Matthew and Luke are both around the same time later, but why Matthew is earlier than Luke is precisely because at some point, I forgot where it was, I have it written down somewhere, but when Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew has this sort of apocalyptic I don't know, monologue, he at some point starts talking about, okay, so this will happen, and immediately after that, the Son of Man will come. So it's
Mm.
almost like Matthew sort of wrote it with this intention, like, yes, I know this just took place, but don't worry because immediately after this took place, you know, the Son of Man will come back. So it suggests that it's written very soon after the destruction of the Jerusalem temple. And in that sense, it's interesting to read the sentence "love your enemy" because obviously the sense of the enemy was much larger, perhaps than a decade earlier or even later.
Yeah, and also in consequence to the last episode of Death to the Christians.
Yeah,
It's a
right.
kind of a
That's also a
wild
good point.
next chapter. Love your enemies after the death of
For
all you.
sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So we read a whole gospel, which is pretty crazy. I don't know how you guys enjoyed that. I did mind listening. I found that to be very impactful, and I did it over the course of a couple of days. And usually, maybe I shouldn't be doing this, but I speed up my Bible reading a little bit, like I do 2 times or 1.5. But with this one, I really felt I shouldn't because it's so rich with symbolism, and that's what Bas said today to me as well. Is that he really puts that first in his gospel. That's what he cares most about. So maybe you guys can tell me a bit about your experience reading the gospel, and then we can get into Lectio Divina.
Yeah, do you want to start off, GP? Your
Yeah,
experience reading it?
sure. Matthew's my favorite gospel. I'll just say that first of all. Um, I don't know entirely why. I think a big reason is probably because it's got the Sermon on the Mount in it, which is sort of, to me at least, the high point of all the gospels. Um, but yeah, I mean, I read it visually, I guess. I've found that throughout all of the episodes that we've done, I've found it good to like walk around and read at the same time. So that's what I usually do is I pace around and read. And usually I'd take copious notes, but in this case, I found that there was just too much to take. Like it would never end if I started taking notes. So I just read through straight through, and just hoped that if we start talking about a topic, I'll think of some things that occurred to me. And I should also say I've read it. I've read it a few times before, so it's not like the first time through for me.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think my experience was probably similar, except for the walking around part. Um,
Though I could see
Even
you
though I
do
do,
that.
yeah, I think it's some. I think Nietzsche even recommends sort of walking while writing, at least, you know. So, anyways, yeah, and also that I was a little bit more aware again this time, of the Jewishness of Matthew's gospel, which stood out like far more than when I just read it, sort of in the sense of how could it speak to me? What are the moral lessons that I can take away? But really, sort of seeing like how he emphasized that, and then maybe also like just the tensions that are sort of clearly there. So I found that interesting. I found the five-part structure also interesting, the five big speeches that are there, maybe mirroring sort of the five main books of Moses, or like the Torah,
Yep.
depending on how you look at it.
Jesus as Moses.
Yeah, exactly. So all of that is interesting. Obviously, we're gonna talk about the start of Matthew, which is not there. Like there's no nativity story in Mark. There is one in Luke, but it's different. And this one very much seems to like mirror or symbolize, like the Moses story. So we'll get to that, I guess. But yeah, should I just start reading one
Yeah,
section and then we'll go
I think
maybe
that's
through
good.
like maybe we'll do so I won't explain as much. We'll just do like a short version,
Mm.
and yeah, so that we have plenty of time to discuss the rest of the chapter. Well, plenty of time. That's debatable.
Yeah, we'll have
But
time.
all right. Oh yeah, you have to probably. I'm gonna
Yep.
ask if I can share my screen.
Go ahead.
Gonna send you.
You're good.
Okay, I'm good. And then I'm gonna share it. Oh yeah, let me just check. And then it's this one. Let's see if this works. Yeah. Okay. You can see it, right?
Yeah, looks good.
This is Matthew 18. I mean, I could honestly start wherever. So there's a beautiful sentence about, you know, uh, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, and then he called a little child. So I could start there. Then there's this very controversial one about if your eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out or throw it away. But we'll surely get to that. I just want to focus on perhaps even just like this short section. It's not even this part. It's really like the final part that I'm concerned about. But I'll start reading here. And the church is obviously a little bit anachronistic because, there were assemblies, but the church as we know it is obviously different. So that's just good to keep in mind. If a brother or sister sins, go out and point out the fault, just between the two of you alone. If they listen to you, you have won them over. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of two or three witnesses. If they refuse to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. Truly I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, I tell you that if two of you on earth agree about anything you ask for, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. For where two or three come together in my name, there am I with them. So I'll focus on this final sentence for the Ruminatio, and then I'll stop sharing. Where two or three come together in my name, there am I with them.
Where two
Lucas,
or three come together in my name, there am I with them.
Where two or three come together in my name, there am I with them.
Oops.
Where two or three come together in my name, there am I with them.
Where two or three come together in my name, there am I with them.
For where two or three come together in my name, there am I with them.
Where two or three come together in my name, there am I with them.
Where two or three come together in my name, there am I with them.
Where two or three come together in my name, there am I with them.
Where two or three come together in my name, there am I with them.
Where two or three come together in my name, there am I with them.
Where two or three come together in my name, there am I with them.
So now think about what this evokes or provokes in you, perhaps. What does it bring up? Just very brief thoughts, can even be a word or two or a sentence. I think what this evokes in me is a sense of gratitude.
What this evokes in me is a sense of presence, presence of Jesus.
What this evokes for me is a sense of assurance.
What this evokes in me is a sense of mystery too. Perhaps even provokes, I guess, but evokes, yeah.
Yeah, what this provokes in me then is that this could be a real thing. It's yeah. Stop.
That's a good point.
What this provokes in me is the question whether that means that the Spirit of Christ is with us in the same sense as the Spirit of anyone else that we might come together in the name of, so to speak, or whether, like Lucas suggested, this means something deeper than that, something more real, more concrete.
Yeah. So what this evokes in me is also a sense of responsibility that, you know, if we gather in his name, then supposedly I'm no longer solely speaking on my own behalf. I am speaking with him. That seems significant, if true. Yeah.
What this provokes in me is it makes me wonder about what it means to worship on your own or to be in Christ's name on your own.
For me, this evokes the importance of community, that these early followers of Jesus were essentially communal, and that the more individualistic type of Christianity came much later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So many good things. What this evokes in me as well is a looking forward, a feeling of looking forward to the hour that is coming right now, where I will be discussing this with you and sort of feeling this as a part of that. So gratitude again. Yeah.
What this evokes in me is a feeling of Aaron, help me. Nabijheid.
Yeah. Proximity,
Yeah,
closeness.
sure. Yeah.
What this evokes for me is the previous verse, the importance of the previous verse is a promise. It's a promise that what you ask will be granted. And there's quite a few of these promises in the Gospel of Matthew. And I like that because it's very concrete. It's not just suggesting what I said before, which is this sort of feeling or the sense of the person will be with you, but that a prayer will concretely be granted. And so I feel like that's an important part of this passage as well.
Right. Yeah. No, you're right. That's a good point. Good to point out. So now maybe feel free to speak a little bit longer, like a minute or so, perhaps relating to something of personal memory. It's not merely evoking or provoking. For me, I have to think honestly, but what am I reminded of? I guess I'm reminded of all the times that I have felt that sense of presence, um, like almost like I guess this is maybe similar in some ways to what John Vervaeke is getting at when he's describing dialogos, that it's like not something you sort of, you bring about by demanding it or something like that, or you can facilitate it sort of with this sense of certainty that it will come, but there's nonetheless this sense that it's like the spirit in the room that in some way sort of can get you into this flow state together. And I've often experienced this either sort of, in religious practices, but also outside of that in really good conversations or in a really good sort of jamming session. I know that not all of those are in Jesus' name, but I'm trying to think if they could be analogous to those types of to some of those types of experiences where you close your eyes and then you open them again and you look at the other person with the sense of recognition, and it's like, whoa, something new came about that wasn't there before. It's almost like, we were able to facilitate the coming about, the manifestation of something that is extremely fundamental. Maybe someone, uh, yeah, okay,
Thank you.
Lucas.
What I'm reminded of is a memory that I had praying with my parents some years ago, and it was at a moment where I was already on a positive path. I would say I was feeling sympathetic toward faith, but not fully in faith. And they prayed for me, and I felt something profound, something. Yeah, this word that I just used, or that you translated for me, is proximity. It was quite incredible that I came out of it, and I told them that was real. That was a concrete. You felt something, some spirit or whatever it may have been, present in that prayer, as if we called it forth, and that was felt undeniable. So
Mm.
Mm.
That's really cool. Um, I'm struggling to think of instances where I've had this type of experience myself, but I wouldn't at all deny these experiences. I think they're very real. Um, but I think maybe it's just my neurological makeup, perhaps, that makes them much less likely for me. Um, what was I going to say? Yeah, I guess this is less personal and more a reflection on the text, but there's sort of power in a name, I guess, where two or three are gathered in my name. And throughout Matthew, Jesus sort of refers to, if in my name, if you do this in my name, if you ask the Father in my name. Um, and so that's interesting as well. It's like his name, his being is extremely powerful, basically. That's the sense that I get from that. Um, and that seems to be true throughout history. That seems to be true in people's experiences. And so I think that's quite interesting. It seems to set this passage apart from other instances where one might feel presence in a certain situation. And it might be analogous, like you said, Aaron, but it seems to set it apart as a thing of its own, as being of unique importance.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. So now I think, the next round is free in the sense it's like free play, that you're uh, able and to respond to what other people said or new insights that come about without any sense of order. And perhaps, yeah, I'll just check if there are responses, and please, if so, share them. And if not, then, we can ask more generally what we thought of the chapter and the book of Matthew. But maybe there was something someone said here that you're like, oh, can I respond to that? So I'm just gonna see if there's space. Gonna leave space for that. But maybe this was also just a useful beginning, which is
yeah,
good, which is good.
I have nothing to respond.
Yeah, no, it was just I also think like I'm aware of the time, and that was just wonderful to hear this already, and I think that's sort of what we're going to explore now. So thank you for these preparatory sort of remarks. I really feel that this covers already quite a few dimensions in terms of what we could sort of yeah, establish here. So I'm hopeful that that will be the case. Um, Maybe before we get on with Matthew, just I'm just curious if there was anything that stood out to you about the particular way it was presented. So, reading it as war literature, in chapter 9, the Jewishness, the fact that it was very artistic, which is also there, the fact
Yeah.
that he was a tax collector. So obviously, like, we can talk about authorship, but then we're gonna be distracted by, well, was the follower Matthew the real author, or was it a student of his, or was it someone else entirely?
Sure.
But I think the chapter presents it in such a way that it's helpful because obviously you can obviously reject it, you can deny it, but then a genius came up with all these sayings of the Sermon on the Mount, or you can say that in some ways this goes back to Jesus saying some of these statements, perhaps not all at once in the Sermon on the Mount, but they were compiled together by someone who must have been close to him. Um,
Sure.
so in that sense, we're invited to read this as saying like, okay, this was Matthew, the tax collector, who had this fascination with numbers. We see that very clearly, who could write well, and who was also interested in giving this sort of more artistic presentation, and very Jewish presentation. So, is there anything that you found from the chapter that we ought to discuss, or like the Star of Bethlehem is also a very famous, like important thing. The five big speeches, the Great Commission in the end, the extra background information about the Pharisees, Sadducees, or Essenes or Sicarii. Is there anything on that front that you'd like to bring about before we get into Matthew?
I don't know if GP has anything.
No, I mean, reading through Matthew, I did notice the Jewishness of it,
Uh,
which was interesting, more so than I have in previous readings. There's a positive kind of sense to law. Like law is often used in a positive way. Lawlessness is used in a very negative way. That actually reminded me a bit of the gospel of, not the gospel, but the letter of James, where law is also used in a very, very positive way. And then, of course, you've
yeah.
got the verse about, I did not come to abolish the law.
Yeah.
Not a jot or tittle of the law will pass
Yeah,
away.
not an
What is
iota. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
not an iota. Yeah.
Yeah, like there's different translation, but yeah. No, fair enough. Exactly. I think that's really interesting because that sort of, I think that suggests something about wait. So ought we perhaps, like is Matthew suggesting that we ought still to partake in all the Jewish rites of passage, basically, even though there is renovations about it? Like, is that what you take away from it, for instance?
Not necessarily. It's hard to say. And it could be that the eventual compiler of Matthew either wasn't a Jewish Christian or was a Jewish Christian of a different sort, maybe
Hmm.
more close to Pauline Christianity.
Mm.
But it could be that the original collector was much more Jewish and law-abiding and so forth.
Yeah.
Because you do get things that are a little bit in tension with just straight up Torah observance. I mean, this one is a bit metaphorical, I guess, and it depends on interpretation. But I'm pretty sure in this gospel you have the little passage about old and new wineskins.
Yeah.
Like, don't pour old wine into new wineskins. And I think that typically that's been taken as meaning like I'm starting a new thing here, basically. Like there's new wine and it's going to need a new container, and that container is going to be the church. So
Yeah.
if that's the interpretation, which it isn't clearly explained in the text, but if that's the interpretation, that would push against sort of just a continuation of the law interpretation. Um,
Yeah.
and there's also like, you Pharisees clean the outside of the bowls, but you don't clean the inside.
Yeah.
Which again, it doesn't necessarily abolish the law because that's a particular like rabbinic interpretation of the law about cleaning utensils and stuff. But it kind of suggests that I think it might have been in Mark, or was at least in Luke, where he says that it's what comes from inside that defiles a person, not come from outside,
Mm.
which is a more extreme statement because that suggests that the kosher laws don't apply.
Mm.
But
Hmm.
that's not in Matthew, but you still get the cleaning outside the bowls versus inside the bowls, which kind of
Yeah.
pushes in. action. So yeah.
And it's interesting that at some point, so related to what you were saying, I remember that at some point in the chapter, Jesus says something. Well, they starts talking about the yeast of the Pharisees, which is also in Mark. And then they're like, "What? But we don't have bread." And Jesus is like, "Oh my God, I just like created
Yeah.
loaves of bread for 9,000 people. So first of all, it's obviously not. I'm not concerned about bread." And then it's like, "Oh, he's talking about the teaching of the Pharisees."
Yeah.
But then he also means to say, like, I think he added explicitly to that. He says like, it's not about what goes into the mouth. Like that's fine. Like all of that. It's about what comes out. So like that really seems to be in tension with some, let's say, Orthodox Jewish teachings about what goes into the mouth, right? So
Mm.
I don't know. Yeah.
It's fun to
So
think about, though, in terms of to what degree we adhere to the law, to what degree Christianity is completely new. And I don't think there's a fully right answer. Even now, as a newly Catholic, I don't feel confident that that's the perfect way or anything like that. Um,
hmm
but I feel consoled by the fact that even at that time it wasn't obvious. And I think that's Jesus as well. He's not obvious. He speaks in parables. Um, I think if it was super clearly defined, then Jesus wouldn't be who he is today, if that makes any sense.
yeah.
Although
Yeah.
it wouldn't scale as far, it wouldn't be open to as many people. Um, but there's always this tension of in and out, what's in and what's out.
Uh-huh.
It's of course a theological tension, but also just in general. Like I had this, I was at the getting initiated on Saturday into the church, and my family was there. Aaron was amongst them, and then he called people up to the mass, and it was fun to see because if you're not baptized in the Catholic Church, you're not technically supposed to take the mass, but well, I don't know if I should. Yeah, I think he's fine with it. my dad took it. He took it,
Oh.
and and
Oh.
and that's and I did that as well before, but it was up without, let's say, knowledge of it. And I think he's fine with me sharing this, but
Of course.
because he says, in the text, Jesus he calls all of us, and I thought that was interesting because I'm not sure what the answer is there. I think it's good that there's a process of initiation, let's say, but I also do really understand the idea of, okay, Jesus calls you up here to take his body, to drink from his blood, and that will save you, and what's a law or a specific, let's say, part of tradition to.
Mhm.
And yeah, so it's a funny tension, but he'd really thought about it and he was conflicted about it, and that he actually changed his mind because the priest phrased it in a way that he felt
Yeah.
invited to, whereas before, when he came with me, he didn't take
Yeah.
it out of respect for the tradition. And so it was, but I love that,
I
that
was.
he battles with that himself.
Can I say, like,
Yeah,
because I was also similarly conflicted, because precisely because the way that the priest phrased it, he said
yeah,
like, well, if you've been baptized and if you've been, sufficiently prepared, then you're welcome to. And he said, but if you're still sort of on that journey, then I welcome you to sort of lay across.
yeah,
And that was really difficult for me because like I'm not necessarily on that journey because I'm not on a journey to become Catholic.
yes,
I do feel sufficiently prepared to partake in it because I've partaken in it in my own church like numerous times. So, he
yeah,
phrased it in such a way that it was like, he didn't explicitly say like, oh yeah, if you haven't been sort of confirmed by the Catholic Church, like, no, he didn't even say baptized in the Catholic
yeah.
Church. But then in the end, I was like, you know what, I'll just pay the cross. I took communion like a few days ago, so it's okay.
We'll be fine for
It's
another
fine.
couple of
But
days.
then indeed my dad and my mom were more like, yeah, I feel called to it now. So I
Yeah,
also
my mom.
respect
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
but it's interesting, and that's what was playing at the time as well. I think in terms of how we deal with tradition, and so yeah, I I was discussing it with my wife on the way back about how this church deals with initiations, and the fact that mine took 9 months, I actually like that aspect of it as well. I think if it took a couple of days, I wouldn't feel as initiated, let's say. But that for me speaks more to the initiation into a church and not necessarily the initiation into a relationship with Christ. If you understand the distinction there. I feel like my relationship with Christ has been ongoing, and I think this is a way to communally access that better. But I've also been able to access that before, especially with, as I recall the prayer with my parents, who I view no less Christian than the people in my church. So
Yeah.
it's yeah. None of these are. It's not clear to me that there are clear answers
Yeah.
as to these questions and these problems.
No, thanks. Thanks for sharing. Like, I think it's good to sort of keep that ambiguity alive as we continue, I guess, like through the chapter,
Yeah.
because you don't want to have this dogmatic, or at least I don't think you should have this dogmatic
No.
certainty. By the way, GP, like, if you want to say something, and if I interrupt or anything, just like use the raise your hand function, and then I'll know that you want to say something.
Sure.
Is it okay, like, if I go over, not, I don't really have notes, but
Yeah.
I'll just sort of quickly go over some things that stood out to me in
Sure.
Matthew, which won't cover anything, and then maybe you can sort of either take a mental or literal note of, like, oh yeah, that's the thing I want to talk about. Is that an okay way of proceeding? Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay. And then I'm gonna do it, let's say, in order of the Matthew chapter. So things that stood out to me was obviously the genealogy at the start, the 14, 14, 14, which was interesting to him. That what I also found interesting about the genealogy is that there are important, even though, like, the Judaic tradition is patriarchal, that Matthew really explicitly decides to name a few women there, and not just any type of women.
No.
These were all Gentile women, or they were, like, there was some kind of sexual scandal involved, which is very interesting.
It's deliberate.
It's deliberate, and so you can also imagine that perhaps he's suggesting, like, yeah, this was also kind of a scandal, but we're not ashamed of it. Like, he's telling his fellow Jews, like, that's not a reason to say, like, oh, like, therefore this can't be it, because the real Messiah, he'll come about, like, through this, like, he must be glorious, etc. So he can't come about through this, this couple that didn't properly, have sex together, and therefore their first child in that way. So I
There's
thought that
a-
was really interesting. Oh, you already want to respond?
Yeah, well, just quickly in between,
Yeah.
because I did quite a segment on this with Boss,
Yeah.
specifically about the genealogy,
Okay.
and he kind of tries to do an attempt of explaining that and why that is that way. And so there's an episode we did. I'll link it in the description.
Cool. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. So, like, I thought that was relevant. I thought obviously the two names that were given to Jesus were interesting. So it's Jesus, which is, I guess something like, from the Hebrew, Yeshua. Like, I'm mispronouncing it, but it means Yahweh saves. So God saves. And then you have Emmanuel, which means God with us. So I think that's like an interesting parallel. That is, God saves and God with us. So it's like
Yeah.
creates the proximity that you were talking about, Lucas.
Mm.
I thought obviously it's cool to think about who the Magians were, like the Zoroastrian priests. I thought that was interesting.
Mm.
So we get close to Zarathustra after all. Then obviously we have all we have the very famous Sermon on the Mount, which, like, there's so much there to talk about, but so, like, there must be something there that is interesting. Like, there's multiple things, but obviously I'm interested in talking about blessed are the destitute, the abject in spirit, or the poor, like those who are poor in spirit, which I find interesting. I find it interesting how critical Jesus seems to be of divorce. It's perhaps something we can talk about.
Yeah.
Obviously, the degree to which he completely radicalizes the Jewish law. So he doesn't indeed abolish it, but he internalizes it. He's like, it's not just about this external outward appearance. It's really like about sort of what happens in the heart, which is just like it's such a radical updating of it. I thought it was interesting where he said like, therefore also, you ought to pray and give in private. We could talk about our Heavenly Father. That's one thing which like just seems interesting that he gives this new prayer, which we still sort of say until this day,
Yeah.
which I thought was interesting. Um, then let me just check. I think like that's the first part. Yeah,
Okay.
maybe I'll stop there already. Like
Yeah, that's perfectly
that's the
good.
first of the 5 blocks. That should be plenty of material for another 3 hours to talk about. But was there anything in there that stood out to any of you?
GP, if you have anything.
I mean, the Sermon on the Mount, I mean, there's nothing like it really.
Yeah.
I mean, there is the Sermon on the Plain, I guess, in Luke, which is somewhat like it. But I don't know. I prefer
It's kind of plain compared to this, right?
it is kind of plain. Yeah, yeah. Um, I don't know. I'm apprehensive to dive into it because it would maybe involve most of the rest of the time if we took it. Was there anything like in it that stood out particularly to you guys?
Oh, I might have to pull it up.
Yeah.
So, verses.
So it's chapter 5 to 7.
Yeah.
I think I definitely got a better sense of like, um, I thought it was interesting when I heard, oh, but like I've been like sort of crazy preparing for this session, not because I'm like, oh, I want to ace this particular discussion, but just because I'm like, okay, this is yet another way to get into the Gospel of Matthew. So I listened to a lot, like a lot of lectures by Tim Mackey of the Bible Project about it, and I had some other sources which I thought were interesting. And I don't know where I got this particular point, but I thought it was interesting that in chapter 5, where he talks about, blessed are those who are poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, that he's not necessarily making this like a normative statement. In some sense, you could argue he is, like that it's like you ought to be poor in spirit because you ought to be receptive. Think also about the kenosis aspect. You ought to empty yourself, and then you can sort of make this space for God to enter into you. But he's also making kind of like this, he approaches those who are listening to him. It's just like, hey, you think in your current way of understanding the world, like if you compare yourself to the Roman Empire, that you are nothing, but you are blessed for it, right? So I sometimes felt a little bit, especially like in Luke, we're going to get to that next time, but then Luke just changed it to blessed are the poor. He doesn't keep the in spirit part. So
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. So then I sometimes felt like, oh, so I ought to be poor. That makes sense. And otherwise, I'm not blessed. And I'm not sure if he's saying that specifically, right? So
Yeah.
I just thought that was an interesting point that we could already talk
He
about.
he might he might be a little bit because I think later in Matthew there is the story of the rich young man who
Of
comes to him.
course, of
So
course, yeah.
um
But even that one is like debatable because he's like trying to follow Jesus and he seems unsure about it. So he's like, what else can I do? I've done everything, right? So it
mhm.
almost like I'm not there yet. And then Jesus is like, well, if you really feel like you're not there yet, then you ought to do this. So it's a little bit complex how to interpret that part. Um, but obviously, like I do agree that it's very clear that money is the root of all evil, and
Love of money.
that the love of money is the root of all evil. Thank you,
You
Bitcoin.
cannot serve God and mammon.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
This is
So so
true.
so I do think it's like a significant issue, um, but nonetheless, I just have just like a more nuanced understanding of it now. Um, but yeah, I mean, David Bentley Hart is a Christian socialist, so he is really clear on like,
Hmm.
yeah, obviously this is like as no one is living the Christian life because we're all way too rich for it.
Mm.
And I thought it was interesting when like my pastor, by the way, he said that, yeah, you don't realize like we're all paying for praying for people on the other side of the world, in war zones. But they're praying for us. Like they think that we are, like we're constantly distracted and deceived, and like by all these riches we have. I was like, oh yeah,
That's a
that's
good
a good point.
perspective.
Yeah.
I think it's generally good to reflect on yourself. I think it helps you reflect on yourself, and I think it's the richness aspect, also the parable of, or well, it's not really a parable, that it's harder for a rich person to
Mm-hmm.
go to heaven than a camel go through the
Yeah,
eye of a
camel.
needle or something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's it.
That's it. That's confronting, man. It's a confronting one. Like,
Yeah.
I think about it a lot. I still don't really know how to deal with it fully. I mean, if you gotta be very practical about it, if you give everything away, you're perhaps also less capable of, living a good life, let's say. If you have absolutely nothing to live off of. Then again, Socrates was poor. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that
I think it makes a certain sense when you consider it in terms of like renunciation. Like
yes,
you do actually need to renounce everything and potentially even your life. Like the early Christians were martyred a lot. So
yes.
Yeah.
like if you're not prepared to do that,
If you're
then
not prepared to lose
that's
it,
what he's saying. Yeah.
yes, yes, you have to be
And so
prepared
the
to
rich
lose
young man
everything.
wasn't prepared to give away his possessions. Like that was
Yeah.
his limit, which is very relatable. I'm not at all implying that I wouldn't say the same thing,
Oh.
Yeah,
but that seems to be what's demanded of for like for like that salvation. I mean, it's to me like the sort of Eastern religions cast a light on that as well, because that's that you need to renounce everything
Mm-hmm.
in order to achieve enlightenment. Because as long as you're still attached to things, then you're not going to be able to take that step.
yes, yes, and I think that everything in its time. Uh, there's a time for everything. My mom likes to say. It's also a
Mm-hmm.
verse from the Bible. It's one of her big mottos, and I think that
In Ecclesiastes, yeah.
yeah, and I think for me that relates because attachments are also part of faith. I think marriage for me is part of faith, although of course we've gone through the chapters. It's also a debated point in the followers, but um, for me, complete detachment isn't necessarily enlightenment, and attachment in this world is perhaps different than attachment in whatever is beyond. Like, I think that kind of relates to this idea of hell, where if you can't let go of the things that needed to be let go of in the right time, then you
Mm-hmm.
start to or get into dark places. It's a sense of, what is this, discernment? This word I like a lot. Discernment of uh, makes sense in my head, but it doesn't so much verbally. That things in their proper place, let's say. And
Mm-hmm.
I do think there's attachment in its proper place is it can serve a good thing. Let's say it can serve a good thing, and
Yeah.
let's say a good person with a healthy amount of power or money or wealth can elicit a lot of good, but it cannot eat you.
I would agree with you, Lucas. But I would suggest that maybe Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew isn't saying that.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
he is taking a more radical approach.
And this is, by
Like
the way, the same Jesus who
Mm.
says you ought to hate your father and mother, like for my
Exactly.
sake, like, yeah.
Exactly. And it's not just a complete detachment, sort of like Buddhism or something like that, because you have to have complete attachment to Jesus and God through Jesus. And so that is the point. From like in the context of Eastern religions, it's bhakti basically. It's devotional worship of a form of God. Um, and that's what he's offering. I think it's really wonderful. Like it to me, it makes a lot of sense. Seen through a Hindu lens, he's like offering himself as an object of devotion, so that all our energies can be directed away from the dispersed things of the world, concentrated in Him, through whom God shines, and then that's how we're delivered. That's how we're saved. Um,
Is it?
the pattern's really wonderful. The way it matches up to me, at least.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, can you tell me maybe a bit more about that? That sounds interesting. The pattern, how it relates to the Eastern concept you were talking about.
Yeah, just the pattern of the avatar of the incarnation of God. The avatar comes, the avatar preaches wisdom, but more importantly, exists in this world as a figure for, like, as a center for devotion,
Yeah.
as something glorious and lovable that people can be attached to, and then all their passions become concentrated in that
Mm.
religious attachment, and then because they come from God and essentially are God, that intense attachment connects them to God, directs them up to God, and then they're delivered from the world of suffering and illusion.
And
And so yeah, that to me is Jesus.
that's
Yeah.
that's amazing actually. But does that mean that they lose everything?
You mean the person who devotes themselves to the avatar?
I should give some more context. When you are prepared to lose something, when you've decided I don't need to be attached to these things and I can let them go. Um, in my experience, sometimes you get things once you stop trying to get them, if you know what I mean. But
Hmm.
so does it mean when you give your life up, almost you give all these things up, your passions and your attachments? Does that mean in practice you also lose them and you live like a monk, or can you still
Yes.
have? You do.
Oh, yes and no. I mean, there's huge complexities in this, and obviously this is a discussion about Matthew, not about
I'm sorry.
Hinduism. But
Yeah.
like you did ask. So, um, traditionally, it's been you become a monk and you literally renounce the world. But if you read the Bhagavad Gita, there's an adaptation there, which is like you can even have the single point of devotion in a regular life, like in a married householder life. Um, it's the internal change, it's the internal transformation that matters, right?
Okay.
So in that sense, you do something called karma yoga, which is you renounce the fruits of all your actions and you do them solely for the sake of God. And then the idea is that you, through that internal transformation, can move towards enlightenment. So yeah, in that sense, if that answers your
It makes a
question,
lot of
but
sense. Yeah,
yeah.
it answers.
Mm.
Sorry for wandering, Aaron. Why don't you take us back to the road?
I yeah, so I guess like I also have a question for um GP, and like perhaps some associations that I want to be here are the Book of Job and are maybe even Nietzsche. My
I love
question
it.
is, and then I'm gonna read a few sentences, but it's not even the question might suggest that I think you hold this view, which is not the case. I genuinely sort of want to have this sort of dialogo sense. I don't actually think you hold this view, but I'm curious about your answer, your response to it. The answer is very broadly, is this slave morality, yes or no? Or is this resentment, yes or no? Like basically that's what I'm curious about. That's what I'm thinking about when I'm reading
Yes.
some aspects
Yes.
of the Sermon on the Mount. Um, so I'll start reading at Matthew 5, verse 43. Very famously, it's also the title of the chapter. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. And then I actually think this is an interesting addition, which is rarely mentioned. He causes his son, so the son, to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. And just as a small addition, yeah, I also just noticed that Luke said in the chat, Whitestone name Luke Thompson. If you guys were my enemies, I could still love you because you're so handsome. So, and he's thanking Lucas for wearing a tank top, as is Luke's traditions too. Okay, anyways, what do you think? Like, so that question that I posed to you, I'm very curious what you think of this, and then also you, Lucas, obviously.
So no, I don't think this is resentment. I think the way that it's portrayed here is not it doesn't embody for me resentment, ressentiment, um, and which is really quite amazing. Like I think this is genuine spiritual, just genuine spirituality, basically. Um, You know, he says, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. He doesn't say so that you may heap burning coals on your enemy's head. You know what I mean? So, so the reasoning is clear, and you don't get much of a sense of resentment from Jesus in Matthew. Interestingly, I do think you do get flashes of it here and there, and I think it's more pronounced in John for some reason. But I would just say that's because Jesus was human. Like I don't hold the view that you should never experience resentment or that you can never experience resentment. You know what I mean? Um, but
Hmm.
but making it this making it this sort of central thing of your life is a problem. But
Hmm.
for Jesus, with Jesus, I see very little resentment portrayed here.
Hmm. Thank you. Lucas, do you have anything to say about the statement or?
Well, no, I don't see resentment in him either. Um, I do, I do feel a lot of challenge, kind of going through all of this again. I think we're kind of realizing the degree to which he tries to challenge us and how radical he actually is.
Hmm.
I don't know how that is for you, but
Of course,
I don't think
yeah.
I'm rising to the task fully if I'm really reading all of
That
this
would
the way
be
that.
yeah, that would be very special if you would be completely rising to the task. But I guess that's why it's something to return to time and time again, you know?
You know what's
Um,
funny? It's interesting. We outside my church, we often have a homeless guy just waiting with the sign, and
what's the sign?
just to give him money that he's not doing so well.
Um,
And then
yeah.
you see, it's just a very symbolic thing, I guess. And I mean, he's positioned there, but you just literally see hundreds and hundreds of people walking past it, and
Yeah,
uh,
I know.
and I'm conflicted about it. Sometimes I give him something, sometimes I don't. But it's 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 a whole challenge, all of that.
But I'll tell you a funny story. Like when I was in Edinburgh recently, and I kind of feel sad about saying this in the context of being secret about what you give. Yeah, there's no way of doing this right apparently. But anyways, I want to tell the story. So there was this lady from Turkey. I She told me, and she was begging on the street just as I got out of the supermarket, and she asked for change, and then I said, "Yeah, I don't have any, sadly." And she was like, "Food." I was like, "Yes, I can get you food." So I was like, because I just exited the supermarket, so I can, now give you, I can go back and get something for you. But then she was like, "Great," and then she took me by the hand for like 5 minutes to like another part of town, like to the nearest Turkish supermarket where she then sort of got this basket and got like tons of stuff. Where at some point I was noticing like it adding up to like I think like was a little bit more than 50 euros, where I was like, where I had to tell her like, I'm sorry, yes, but it's okay now, stop please, and I thought that was very interesting psychologically to notice, where I was like, oh yeah, I want to help, and she needed more than I do. And I even noticed that she was going genuinely for groceries and not for something like heroin or something negative. It's like just so, and at the same time, I just felt like, yeah, but 50 euros is a bit much. It's just like, it's just so interesting. But nonetheless, anyways,
That's a lot. I had that
uh,
happen to me as well once. I started just loading up the car and we're not doing this. I'll get you
yeah,
this sandwich. I'll get you this.
yeah, exactly. But anyways, but I sort of couldn't resist at least, the small amount. Um, So then, like obviously there are more aspects in the Sermon of the Mount, but I think we covered like a very significant part of it. And maybe it's time to go to other aspects of Matthew, if you're okay with it.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, like
Sure.
obviously there's so much more, but anyways. I don't think we need to focus too much on the second block. It has a bit of an expanded um uh mission discourse, like a commission to the disciples. But other than that, like much of it is very similar to Mark, I think. But yeah, like he gives them a lot of power over impure spirits to heal every disease. So all of that is very interesting. But I'll go to the third part, which is interesting because he adds some aspects. So when Jesus walks on the water, now Peter walks towards him.
Hmm.
That was not in Mark. So that's interesting. And then obviously we know what happens, that, Peter first has faith, but then he starts doubting. And then Jesus says, "Ye of little faith, why did you waver?" So that's interesting. But then a few chapters after, Matthew adds to Mark, which is also why you can imagine why this was used really for church organization. That he says like, you are Peter, and on you, like you are the rock on which I shall build my assembly or my
Hmm.
church, depending on how you translate it, and you'll receive the keys of the kingdom. So like all of that is pretty relevant. And I thought the temple tax story about the coin and the fish was very funny, but
Yeah.
like that's not maybe something we have to talk about. But that's also something that's not necessarily in Mark. And obviously, like in chapter 13, I didn't talk about that, but the extra parables about the weeds, about storing up your treasure, about the pearl,
Yeah.
about casting the net. So there's quite a lot in the third block. Is there anything that stood out to you from the third block, either of you?
One does get
No.
the sense that Peter
Sorry.
was the sorry.
Go ahead.
One does get the sense that Peter was the leader of the church, at least in the eyes of the writer of Matthew.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and that story was also in Mark, right? Or was it not? Does he
Well,
say to her, "I
not
give you the
not
key
not the
of the
Peter
kingdom"?
walking on water, and not the I think the yeah, I'll probably have to go back, but my goodness. Let me just check. But keep talking.
Yeah, but anyway, I mean, it seems that Peter does have that role in Matthew, just kind of based on all those hints. Um,
Yeah.
Which is interesting because obviously, like, and I think that maybe Bass's chapters talk about this somewhere or
Yeah.
other, but like there was, was James the leader of the church?
Yeah.
Was like who was
Was,
actually
yeah.
the leader of the church? Was it
Yeah.
like a council of elders that governed it together? Like what was actually going on? But Peter does seem to have this really significant role,
Yeah.
um, which is interesting. And then, of course, in Matthew, you also have his denial of Jesus, which is also significant for someone who you are giving the central role,
Yeah.
which I
Exactly.
think is really, really cool and really
Yeah, and
important.
obviously, so like I just looked it up. So in that regard, in Mark, there is not this like Peter does say you are the Messiah, but then it just
Uh-huh.
stops. Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. So the comments
Uh-huh.
about like
Uh-huh.
oh you are the rock, like on which like that is added, and then also like the keys of the kingdom. But what is also in Mark is that indeed, like then at some point, Jesus predicts his death, and that Peter starts to rebuke him, and then he says, "Get behind me, Satan." And I think, like in Matthew, that is more powerful because you have this juxtaposition where it's like, Peter, like on you, I will build my church, and then it's
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
and then he starts like, well, you only think about what people want, about what men want, and therefore get behind me, Satan, or accuser, depending on how you translate it. And I think that is very like that feels much more about sort of the opponent processing that you want that you would want the Catholic Church to think about at all times, sort of. To it's like, yes, we are hopefully serving Jesus in the name of Peter, who was received the keys of the kingdom. But at the same time, we tend to think about the affairs of men and not of God, and therefore, we tend to have this accuser aspect in ourselves, which I just think is more
Mhm.
interesting in
Yeah.
Matthew.
Yeah, I'm very excited
Yeah.
to see kind of that opponent processing
Uh,
up close in my church. Like I was telling you yesterday, Aaron, that I mean the Catholic Church is such a traditional structure in many ways. But then
mhm.
my priest was talking about um, how he almost left the priesthood and how much he was struggling with that, and I think that kind of mirrored my own journey through how I feel about church, and that he ended up on the idea that if he wants to see any change in the church, then it has to come from within, and
Mhm.
that was also my kind of motivation, I guess, to come back to it. And he also mentioned that for him the church isn't, it's not an absolute thing, it's an instrument. And so
Mhm.
they only, the idea is to only worship Christ. So you're not worshiping Peter, but you're
Mhm.
also recognizing that Peter is the rock on which church is built. And
Mhm.
so it's not negligible. You have to deal with it somehow, but it's not absolute. It's not your, it's not like a cult leader of some sort. Peter isn't a cult leader.
Yeah.
What do you guys make of of that phrase, like whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in
Yeah.
heaven. Um, because to
Yeah.
me that seems like, and I think it's been used by the church to mean this, which is essentially that what the church declares forbidden is truly forbidden and
Oh,
sinful, and
interesting.
what they declare permitted is truly permitted. And so that yeah. So I'm just wondering
Could you,
what you
Yeah.
think of that. It does seem to suggest that in the text to me.
could you repeat it one more time?
Let me go to the passage. Let's see. Do you know where it is
Yeah,
roughly,
so it was
Aaron?
Matthew
18, I think. So
18.
chapter 9, chapter 18, verse 18 also, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. See,
Uh,
truly I say
yeah.
to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Oh yeah, it was just before
Yeah.
our passage
Yeah,
before.
exactly. So we
Bind
had the
on earth
Lectio
shall
Divina
be
thing on
down
this.
in heaven. Whatever
Yeah.
is loosed on earth shall be loosed in heaven. For me, it makes me think of have you seen Gladiator? And he says, "Everything
Mm.
we do here echoes in eternity." I
Hmm.
think that's such a dope line.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it makes me think of, like that heaven and earth are a reflection of each other in some sense, and
Yeah.
that uh, the things that you do on earth, they are real also in heaven. I I didn't immediately jump to that interpretation that you just mentioned, but I'd like to hear more about it, and I'm wondering what Aaron thinks of it
Yeah.
because it's specific language,
Yeah.
loosed, bound.
Yeah, and it comes just after a verse about someone
Bless
who
you.
refuses to listen to the church, basically.
Okay.
Someone who sins and doesn't accept reprimand from the church.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's hard to say like exactly like who he's talking to at this moment, right? So because if he's talking to indeed sort of this, like obviously this is a bit further than where we just were, but still, if he's talking in the sense like, yeah, I trust you, disciples, because he just told them to be like children, and then it's like whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and exactly like it has this sense of I give you sort of as this these starters of the church authority, then it's
Or
very
even just Peter, or even
yeah,
just Peter.
or even
So
just Peter, even but I don't think it's clear that he's talking just to Peter, but because it's like the disciples came to Jesus and asked at the start of chapter 18. But it could
you're
be,
right, you're right,
yeah,
you're right. I was
it
I
could
was
be,
misplacing it in the part
yeah.
where he
But
says that he gives
but
the keys.
nonetheless, like you can also think that he has the Great Commission at the end. So like it seems that he's talking not just to Peter, but he did give this special privilege to Peter in the passage which we just read. But he's talking to all the disciples. So then it's I think interesting to consider that maybe he's talking to them and he's saying, like I really think that you with these sort of gained insights that you now have, that you can decide whatever will be bound in heaven and whatever will be
Hmm.
because otherwise like it seems I just find it very problematic to interpret it otherwise because obviously okay if I bind let's say heroin usage on earth will that then be bound in heaven and obviously I don't necessarily mean heaven in the afterlife because obviously the kingdom of God is about you know sort of thy kingdom come thy will
Yeah.
be done so it's
Yeah.
about heaven also coming to earth. I find that very difficult to understand.
Mm.
But what's the alternative, Aaron, that you're I'm trying to get the difference between what I said and what you're saying.
Oh no, no. So, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm sort of just,
Okay,
just sort of
okay.
sharing my thoughts here. So um um so it
Because
might be that I'm aligned there.
theoretically,
Yeah.
if the church, as in this the structure established by Christ,
Yeah.
said heroin use is okay or even meritorious,
Yeah.
by this logic, that would in fact be so.
Yeah.
The in heaven is sort of like in reality or in God's eyes or something like that.
Yeah.
I feel like he's giving them the authority to make law, and that's the
Yeah.
continuation of law, which is interesting in the Gospel of Matthew.
Yeah, exactly. And it is in the context of the passage of the Lectio Divina. So because also the sentence soon after it, right, like seems to be if two of you on earth agree about anything you ask for, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven, which seems difficult if he would just be saying that to sort of to you generally, because then it's like, oh, nice, then you have two Satanists who agree on everything, and then it will be right. So that seems problematic. So I do think you're right, and that yeah. But I think like in general that's why it this Matthew could be read really in this sense that it seems to prepare for this church structure, even though Matthew obviously couldn't know what it would be looking like. Um,
These
yeah,
passages to me seem more like they weren't, I mean, I could be wrong, but they
yeah,
seem less likely to be Jesus's actual words and more likely to be either added or kind of expanded on Jesus' words,
Mm.
just because they're so specific to church organization.
Mm.
yeah,
But then I could be wrong. He could have really just lived his life, or at least the years of his preaching, like
yeah,
building a community quite deliberately and laying down laws and structures. So
yeah.
I could.
So one thing I heard, which is interesting in this regard, is like we right before this we have the story of the wandering sheep, which is obviously very powerful. Like he leaves the 99, he goes to find the one, and apparently in Luke, and again I'll have to reread it, and then we'll find out when we discuss the next chapter. But Luke emphasized that this is like something about you, that if you as a sinner leave the herd and if you go sort of away from it, then he'll come and find you. But
Mm.
for Matthew, you can interpret it slightly like he has a slightly different emphasis. So you can really think of it as saying like, okay, you ought to go back and find the one wandering sheep. So he could be speaking to his disciples, like again in this context that you're also describing, sort of
Mhm.
saying, like, yeah, you ought to find all these people that are out there. So I do think it's appropriate to read it in the context you also said, like, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go to look for the one that wandered off? And if he finds it, truly I tell you, he is happier about the one sheep than about the 99, which is very different. Like, it's so the perspective
Yeah.
is from the one finding the sheep as opposed to from the sheep being lost, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Mhm. Mhm.
So yeah, it's like, so yeah, like I think it's interesting that we now have that aspect. Anyways,
We're
there's
go-
more.
there.
Go ahead.
There's a lot more. We're going through a lot. I'm also wanting to be respectful of both your time. So how do we want to do the
I
next?
I could go on for a bit longer, but maybe
I don't know.
I
What
don't know.
GP are you doing on time?
I mean, I could go for a few more minutes.
Shall we?
Yeah,
Shall we
that's,
do about 10 more minutes or so? Is that alright with both of you?
sounds good.
Yeah,
Aaron,
okay.
what do you want to get in there before?
So like
There's a
let
lot.
me just give an overview because like now we had the third one. So let's go on the fourth part and the fifth part. Which in the chapter by Bas is summarized as saying that in the fourth part, so that's chapters 18, which we already on until 23, he is preparing his followers for their time without him. I definitely thought it was interesting. Like I've been reflecting on this too, and I actually do think it is problematic that indeed many, like both in Orthodox and Catholic churches, that people take up the name Father when it's so explicitly said you ought not to be called Rabbi or, or teacher or Father because you're all brothers and sisters. So Jesus seems to be very much against at least this explicit hierarchical part. Like I know that he's giving out sort of like this sense of like oh you are the rock on which I built my assembly. So he gives them some authority, but at the same time he doesn't want them to consider themselves higher than other people by sort of by you shall call me father, and I shall not
But
call
what
you
about
father.
one's literal father? Because if you read that passage,
Yeah.
wouldn't it also mean you don't call your own dad father?
Well, so like exactly like so I think that's complicated
Call him Brandon.
because the first sentence is something like do not allow yourself to be called teacher, I think. Sorry, I have to find the
Yes.
passage.
Do not
Where is
allow
it?
yourself to be called instructor for. Man, I was
Yeah.
by the tree when I heard
So
that.
I'm also obviously
Yeah.
like well actually I do like the Dutch system, like we say, so like we have the how do I say it,
For
like we
only
have
God instructs you or something
no, no,
like
no,
that.
no, no. We have a difference between you and thou, let's say. So
Okay.
jij and u in Dutch usage. So
Yeah.
that like the second version is more about like oh to you as an authority, but in the Dutch system at least, like they're to call me by my first name and just say you. So basically, even though I'm a
Interesting.
teacher, I don't. Uh, I hopefully don't suffer
So they
from this
call you
part.
Jij and Ja?
Yeah,
That
I mean
my
sometimes people
students don't even
don't.
do that sometimes.
Yeah, but anyways. It's different because in the secondary school we're taught to say
Yeah.
meneer or so Mister
Yeah.
or um
Interesting.
I'm trying to find the passage. Do you know where it is?
The
So it's
instructor one?
like, yeah,
I'll find it. Instructor
yeah.
passage. And the
I guess
timing is
that
yeah.
in interpreting it, it might be a question of, is this the same kind of statement as if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out? Or is it like, in other words, how literally is it supposed to be read?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
Matthew
it is
23,
it.
10, 11, just so you know.
Thank you, thank you. It is definitely like he has a sense for the hyperbolic. Yes. So I'll read from the David Bentley Hart translation, and then it's indeed chapter 8. Um, Do not let yourselves be called rabbi, for there is one who is your teacher, and you are all brothers. So I read the second sentence in that context, and that's why
Yeah.
I'm making a differentiation between that and biological father. But anyways, and do not call someone on earth father, for there is one who is your heavenly father. So, like I do agree, if you read the second sentence literally, then I ought not to call my own biological father father. But I think it's complicated, like because I think it's in the sense of church father. Oh, and neither let yourselves be called instructors, because your one instructor is the anointed, and the greater among you shall be your servant.
Yes.
And whoever exalts himself will
Another
be humbled.
challenging one.
Yeah,
So
so
challenging.
sure.
Also,
Yeah,
what do you do with priests? I call my priest father.
yeah.
That's strange, isn't it?
Well, this is why there's some Protestant Catholic tension
Yeah.
in this discussion.
Yes, of course.
So yeah, no, 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 I
I'm not a very
definitely.
good Catholic though, and I'm gonna be honest with you guys.
Uh,
Sometimes I just call him Shaq. It's his name. It's not really good, but
we, that's so funny. I was talking to my dad about this actually, I think yesterday, where they said like, yeah, to be fair, like in the Protestant tradition, at least in Dutch, we say Domine, which is obviously from Dominus. But now we more often say something like predikant, which just means preacher, so someone who preaches the sermon. And that's not exactly the same as saying like instructor or father or
yeah.
master. Um,
You know
so
this the
yeah,
distinction between esoteric and exoteric, meaning that there's some
yeah,
sayings that you cannot just interpret on your own. You need they're mystical type of sayings. So that in
yeah,
maybe GP knows a bit about this from Eastern religions, where some of the stuff, some of the sayings are not for everyone. It's the level of initiation you need to be.
Well, there's a whole question around who is the Sermon on the Mount intended for?
Yeah,
hmm
You know,
absolutely.
like is it traditionally, and I think in the Catholic tradition, it's understood as being intended for people leading a religious life, as in like monks and nuns, and it's
Mm,
not strictly intended for just ordinary people.
interesting.
yeah.
Uh, the way that it's set up in the gospel too is interesting. Let me go back to it to show you what I mean. Where is it? There we go. Seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him, and he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, so there's crowds, he goes away from them, up onto the mountain. Um, he sits down, his disciples come to him, and then he starts speaking. And so, who is he primarily talking to? The crowds or the disciples? Now, there is a verse at the very end of the sermon where it says that the crowds were amazed with what he says. So, clearly they heard them, or at least some of them heard him, right? But that doesn't resolve the question of who was he primarily talking to.
Can
I
I?
feel like the fact
Yeah.
that he goes up a mountain, gathers his disciples immediately around him, might mean that he's talking directly to them and only secondarily to the people, especially because he says elsewhere in Matthew that he talks to the people in parables because many of them just won't understand him, and that's the point, right? But to you I give the secrets of the kingdom. And so, if that were true, then that kind of changes the meaning of the sermon from everyone has to do this to those those who are extremely like special or elect or you know they have are given these requirements and everyone else can just live
Yeah.
a more normal life, let's say.
So I see that, and I definitely think it's possible, but just like as a small challenge to that would be the order of the way in which Matthew is written, which so in chapter 4, verse 18, he first calls Simon, or called Peter, and then Andrew, and then this James and his brother John. So he calls them, and we then think like, oh, those were the disciples, right? But nowhere is the word disciple here. It's just like, oh, he just calls those people. And then there's also no mention of all the other disciples. That's later. That's actually like I think in chapter 8 or something like that, when he's like when they mention, for instance, Judas, um, so like all the other disciples that we know of. So actually, the first mention of the word disciple is precisely where you just said, which is chapter 5. His disciples came to him, which is interesting because we're not at the point yet where we've heard about this assembly of 12 disciples who follow him. So it's some people argue that this is a way of saying that, well, disciples is just sort of anyone who followed him at the time. So basically, all those people who came there to visit him, like those were his disciples because it's the first mention of the word. So it's really
Okay,
unclear.
I see.
Yeah,
I see what you're saying. I feel like it
yeah,
would be an unnecessary thing to state, but I see the argument like that the crowds become the disciples basically.
yeah,
But my rejoinder would simply be that you could just stay with the crowds. You wouldn't have to then say that he went up the
yeah,
mountain and his disciples came to him.
yeah,
But I also don't necessarily think that that interpretation I gave is true, just because
yeah,
whole sermon is in the Gospel of Matthew, which is intended to be at least heard by everyday believers in the early Christian community. So the
yeah,
fact the fact that it is given such a prominent place in itself might speak against the idea of it being more of an esoteric thing than just a straightforward
yeah.
requirement. Yeah.
No, I think exactly, and I think that's right. And by the way, I do also like I think there's problems with the view that I just shared. I just wanted to give it sort of as a nuance
Yeah.
because I
Hmm.
I definitely don't think it's complete because obviously in the rest of the whole chat of the whole book, like disciples is more shared in that sense where it's this smaller group. Um, so yeah, no, thank you, and I think that's a good point. Okay, I'll just mention a few points that we ought to talk about that we could talk about in closing, if you're okay with it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, so definitely what I thought was interesting was there was this story about I think it was about the wedding when he was talking to the Pharisees, which is very strict. Um, Obviously there's also the one about the two sons. There's the one about the workers in the vineyard, which is specific to Matthew, which I thought was is also quite radical. That it's like that you ought to stop thinking about what is rightfully your share. Like I really think that's an interesting way of sort of approaching it. Um, um, and I thought it was really, but then like there's a harshness in Matthew too, where there was this story, and I think even Jonathan Peugeot used in his recent video where he says like Christians ought not necessarily to be nice, where it was the passage where like he invited everyone to the wedding, but people didn't show up. So then so then in the end he invited other people to the wedding. And that's sort of commenting on the Pharisees, like you were invited, but you're not coming. Like you want your own thing. You don't want the genuine sort of God's kingdom. And then he says, but then there was someone who was not exactly invited. He wasn't wearing the same garment outfit. And then basically he was just completely abused after that. It's like, and he ought to be abused. He ought to be punished because, he was not invited. He was not part of it. So there's this harshness in Matthew too. Or about, for instance, the 10 girls who ought to wait for the bridegroom with the lights, and then five of them, they weren't so wise. And, like they are excluded from the kingdom. So you ought to really be present. So there's also this sense in Matthew, which is, and it's hard to say whether or not this goes back to Jesus himself or not, but which is far more about, yeah, like, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So please repent now, because it might be too late soon. So I just think that's an aspect that we haven't talked about. I thought the story of the talents is also some one that we haven't really talked about, but I thought it was interesting, and I actually read it in a new light this time because of one of the lectures that I heard about it, where it was really emphasized that it wasn't not necessarily the case that the one with the fewest talents was, a bad person because he only got so few talents, because that seems a bit harsh, just because he got less and then he didn't do anything with it. But he might have been insecure, but precisely because of his attitude, because the first thing he says is like, well, I know you are a harsh master. And it's like, so I think it says more about that approach to God. If you're like, well, I just think this is like a harsh person. It's not a
I, I,
generous
I
person.
agree. I just want to jump in and say I
Yeah,
agree with that a
go.
lot. I love that approach.
Yeah,
Because and the master doesn't necessarily deny it. He just doesn't sort of go into it. He says, if you knew that I was if you knew that I was like this, then you would have acted like this, because that would have
yeah,
been the logical thing to do.
exactly. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
so
yeah,
I like that these a lot of these parables make God into like a rather
uh,
shocking figure. You know,
yeah,
and so yeah, like this is a great example of it, because to me the message seems to be don't be resentful. Life is harsh, life is unfair, but you still actually have to make the absolute most of it that you can.
yeah.
Um, so little Nietzschean message hidden in the Gospels there.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. I think that's good. Yeah, and then maybe finally there are some things that Matthew adds which were not necessarily in Mark, such as Judas's death, like him killing himself. The fact that Pilate's wife tries to talk to Pilate, like, no, I had a dream about him and he really bothered me, so please persecute him, which is interesting. The guard at the tomb, also the Great Commission at the end, which is like maybe we ought to read in closing, because it seems to sort of summarize everything, so we can do that. Um, and yeah, let me just check. Yeah, maybe the story of the guards, but honestly, like m much of that is quite similar nonetheless. And obviously, the explicit resurrection account that is relevant. Um, yeah, okay. Those are just some things that I wanted to share, and I was curious what points you wanted to talk about in closing. We can also do this as a review round and then we read the Great Commission as a conclusion. What do you think?
So we would conclude with the Great Commission, and then, yeah, as a closing statement, you mean like?
Yeah, because I
Okay.
think it summarizes,
Yeah,
I think, the
that's
message that Matthew wants to
that
give,
sounds
right?
pretty
And
cool,
and
actually.
that all seems to be in line with what we talked about. That this is really about sort of church structures too.
Okay.
But maybe you want to review first and respond to anything that I said or something that I missed. Like probably there were things that stood out to you that I haven't mentioned. Probably I forgot many things. So
Yeah, well, it's impossible to remember all of this. Well, so we're doing a review round. Um, can I start? Is that cool?
please.
Yeah.
Go for it.
All right. Well, I'll say that I really enjoyed this one. I appreciated how the symbolism was so strong in this. The numbers, I mean, it starts off perfectly with the genealogy. Also, the end we haven't discussed, but it ends kind of with the call as well. To you want to say something, Aaron? See a
No, no, no,
specific
no, no.
hand movement.
No, sorry,
No,
sorry.
no, no. um, yeah, it ends as a call to kind of do do his work, which also clearly has been interpreted in many different ways throughout history. Another one of those things. But yeah, I think this gospel is so rich. GP, I think you said it's your favorite. I think it's probably gonna be my
Mhm.
favorite as well, having read it again. Uh, I enjoyed doing the Lectio Divina on that line, where two or more are gathered in my name. I think it will be fruitful to do many more in the Gospel of Matthew specifically. And I do feel that these sessions are always too short somehow. Or yeah, there's just always so much more to discuss. But I think that's also the beauty of the Gospels, that you could absolutely every time you read them find something new that perhaps you hadn't seen the same way before. So I'm just delighted about that, and I'm delighted to share this with you guys, and specifically this timing. It's very rich, and I'm very grateful.
Mm.
Aaron or GP, I don't know.
Well, I'll add the Great Commission so GP can go
All right.
first. Yeah.
Um, I mean, I can give a few wrap up comments. Yeah. Okay. So let's see. Yeah, I mean, I guess I won't focus too much on the material at the end, because that could take more time. But as just a
Feel free
general
to.
reflection,
Yeah.
it was something I wanted to respond to, but I can't remember what it was now. In what you said. Um,
What did I say?
but let's see. I guess for me the resurrection story, it's very brief, right? Like just chapter 28 is the resurrection. Um,
Hmm.
it's a little bit disappointing in a way, like because it's very, very brief. It sort of rushes through it. And that's the part that you kind of want to hear the most about, right? Like what actually happened here. Um, but in general, the yeah, like I did say, it was my favorite gospel, like Lucas mentioned. And oh, I think something that I was going to say, it might not have been what I was thinking of, was it's just that there may be another tension between the writer of Matthew and, let's say, Jewish followers of Jesus, potentially just to the extent that he emphasizes the Jews taking the blood of Jesus on themselves during the trial. Pilate washes his hands. He
Hmm.
says, I'm not responsible for this man's death. The crowd shouts, let his blood be on us and our children.
Yeah.
That could be, that suggests maybe some antagonism towards Jews as a whole potentially. So that may speak against sort of like a more strictly Jewish Christian potentially. I'm not sure. But anyway, but yeah, I mean, I really, really loved reading through the gospel. And yeah, I don't quite know what to add really. I think I'll just round it off by sort of coming back to your question, Aaron, a while ago, which was sort of like, how do you see this? Is it resentment or is it not? The Jesus of the Gospel of Matthew, I do not see in that way at all. I see as someone who's deeply, deeply holy, spiritually elevated, just above it in a way, and sort of drawing people up to him. So for me, the figure of Jesus, or Jesus the person, let's say, is someone who's incredibly holy, whoever he was, right? And and had power as well. So when we were going through the letters of Paul, um, I sort of mentioned a couple of times that what comes through to me is like the power of the Holy Spirit. Like this is actual things happening. And obviously, what we didn't focus too much on today, we focused more on sort of parables and teachings, but throughout the Gospel of Matthew is the healings, right? The miracles. Um, and I mean, I personally do believe that they happened, like maybe not every single one of them, I don't know, but I think that that stuff can happen and does happen and did happen. And so the fact that it happened through this particular man is very, very significant. Um, and so, yeah, I see him as being a kind of a manifestation of God, to put it broadly. Um, and and yeah, that's where I'll leave it here. I mean, the theology of the Gospel of Matthew is not quite clear. Like he seems to be an intermediary figure potentially between God and man. Just very broadly speaking, like it's not as explicit as John is about his identity with the Father, but there's such a close association with the Father that it could be almost identity. Like there's a definitely a closeness. Um, but there's also a certain distance as well. Like he prays to the Father that the cup may pass from him. Like one
Hmm.
one of the most moving sort of parts of the gospel
Yeah,
is that. And
I agree.
and the cup does not pass, and he accepts the Father's will. Which
Yeah.
again, to me, coming from a more Nietzschean perspective, is something that I find very powerful in the gospel, because it implies that the Father did in fact will the death of Christ, um,
Hmm.
and gives me a sense of like awe and sort of like, yeah, that kind of thing, more the God of Job or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, I think, was it maybe last time, some maybe it was just a talk I was listening to recently, but the topic of charade came up. Actually, I think it might have been the last talk. I might have been listening to some of the last talk, but somewhere charade came up. It was to do with the Gospel of Hebrews. It might have been you, Aaron, that mentioned this.
Hmm.
Um, because in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus is the sacrifice. I'm sorry, in the letter to Hebrews, Jesus is the sacrifice. And I remember you mentioning that Gerard didn't initially like this. Um, and I don't know. I don't see Gerard's reading. I don't see Gerard's reading so much in the Gospel of Matthew. I see
Oh, five
the
minutes.
sense that Jesus was a sacrifice intended by God, which is a very, to me, transgressive notion, not only of maybe Jewish values, but also of Christian values, or what's come to be Christian values. Uh, so anyway, I'll leave it there.
Ah.
That's just my. I have to throw a provocative thought in every now and
Yeah.
Okay.
again.
We'll
Leave
take
it
it
that
for
way.
next episode then,
So
because we need to talk
I'll
about it.
I'll unfortunately like I'll have to re-listen to it because like we're also finishing off here, so I can't fully in depth respond to everything
No, no,
that
I
you.
wasn't
Do it for
expecting.
the
I'm
No, no,
just
next
no,
saying
no.
I'm
episode.
going to throw it out, and
But
then I'm going to
Yeah.
just
no, no, no,
run
no.
away.
And yeah, and sorry, I got distracted for a moment there, but I'm gonna listen back to this part and then I'll think about it. And just to strengthen your point a little bit, by the way, like that some of what you said, that in that letter to the Hebrews, if you remember, we talked about that. You know, he learned obedience from what he suffered. That's what is said sort of about Jesus, which is just interesting. That you know, like he
Hmm.
wasn't, and then once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him, which also seems
Hmm.
to suggest that. Now I'm gonna. Okay, yeah, got it. Sorry, a note was passed to me. That's why I was distracted. Um, and then good night. Yes. Yeah. Yes, we'll do. Sorry. Anyways, I don't know if you heard of that. Um, then another aspect that also is relevant to your point is where he got the obviously the very almost laughable but nonetheless interesting and fascinating request by the sons of Zebedee, James and John, like to sit at his right and left hand, you know, where he was like, "That's not for me to grant. That's only for my Father to grant," right? And then also there was a different part where he says like, "When all this apocalyptic stuff will take place, only the Father can know, not even I
Mm.
can know." So like,
Mm.
there's so I agree with you. There's definitely all these separations, but you know, obviously, then the question is like, well, maybe in his identity as the Son, you know, like that nonetheless they're both still God, but you know you have the Catholic vision, right? So like God is the Son, God is the Father, God is the Spirit, but the Son is not the Father. You know, like anyways, you have that famous diagram.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
anyways, that's another discussion altogether. I also wanted to briefly respond to what you said. Like I actually do know. I learned that unfortunately that sentence about like let it be on our grandchildren that has been used in very Christian anti-Semitic contexts, which is interesting because it is the most Jewish gospel, and he wants to present the Judaism of like therefore you know what was prophesied by Isaiah came true and all that. So it's so interesting that there's this tension between the Jewishness of the gospel and at the same time this unfortunately I wouldn't say anti-Semitic shadow in Matthew but in the reception history, which is very unfortunate. One explanation that I've heard about that, by the way, relates to indeed the fact that the temple got destroyed, which we said at the start of this conversation. So Matthew also wants to give an explanation, like, "Hey, why do you think your temple was destroyed, dear Jews? That's because you actually the
Well,
God's Son came upon you, and that this
yes,
what happened."
you
Uh,
crucified the Messiah. Yeah,
yeah,
and
exactly.
that
You
makes
crucified. Yeah,
sense.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I wouldn't even necessarily
yeah.
object to that in the sense that
Hmm.
it's in the Tanakh anyway, in the sense that God
Yeah,
sends the Jews into exile for their sins in the Holy Land. Like
yeah,
it could
exactly,
be an internal Jewish thing to say that God is punishing us for being, you
exactly.
know, but from a modern perspective to say
I
that the
agree.
temple was destroyed and the Jews
Yeah.
exterminated from the land for that reason is very,
I agree,
yeah.
and obviously, and there's this small sentence like right before the end where he says like, you know, they mentioned that the disciples took him away, and this story is still circulating about around the Jews until this day, which is really suggesting that there was this very famous sense like in with among Jews in his time, which were saying like, well, it's all you know bullshit because it's just the disciples who did it. I think that's Matthew 28, verse 15.
Mhm.
Um, this story has been widely circulated among the Jews to this very day. Okay, so those are just some some things. Okay, yeah, I really enjoyed it. Like there's so much more, but I really did feel like in the 1.5 hours we had, we touched upon so many significant things and definitely to think about far more. I'm looking forward to reading Luke and the Book of Acts. I know that's like a lot, so probably not in 2 weeks, maybe a bit later. But um, yeah, I was just grateful for some of your insights. I'm definitely going to be listening back to this because there's just so much more that I want to ruminate on, I think. And yeah, I loved reading Matthew, and definitely it opened up to me in a whole new way this time around. And I think some of the aspects that you mentioned, GP, what also stood out to me very much. It was very meaningful. I was happy that we ended up succeeding in being able to read this during Easter time. I watched Bach's Matthew Passion with my other brother last week in Amsterdam. That was glorious, and we had a dramatized reading of it in the Anglican Church in Cambridge. So it was just fantastic and fascinating. So thank you for this timing that was possible, even though unfortunately we had to miss Michael, perhaps because of it. I'll end off with reading the Great Commission, which is just a few sentences.
Yep.
Okay, we'll do that. So this is near the end, the Great Commission. Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Very interesting, by the way. Then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you." Everything, including the Sermon on the Mount. Sorry. "And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." And just one final comment about this. I think this really, sorry, but this really ties together like that at the
Yeah.
start, like halfway through, Jesus says like, "No, only go to the Israelites." And then you
Yes.
have that very famous scene of the woman saying like, "Well, I know that exactly like the food of the children ought not to be given to the dogs, but the dogs ought to receive the crumbs, right?" And then Jesus like, "Your faith is very great." And then all of a sudden you can see that Matthew adds the second feeding to the 4,000, which is not to the Jewish people, but to Gentile people. So all of a sudden Jesus seems to have realized throughout Matthew,
Yeah.
or like that is like, no, it's to all the nations. And that really fulfills what was said in Isaiah. So that's also a development in Matthew itself, which is now fulfilled in the final sentences. So that's my
That's a
final
good
thought.
insight
That's cool.
to finish with, Aaron. I just it came together for me just as you were saying that.
Happy to hear
Like
that.
the crumbs under the table too, and then when you
Yeah.
juxtapose that with all the baskets of bread left over, like it's
Yeah.
quite a striking image.
That is yeah, I hadn't even thought. Thank you. That's good. That's good. Good. Thank you so much, both of
Gentlemen,
you.
thank you.
Yeah.
GP, thank you so much for making the time again.
Thank you both.
We'll schedule
Really
in
enjoyed it.
episode 10. All right, people.
Yeah.
See you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Have a good day and
Bye.
have a good night. Bye
Thank
bye.
you. Bye bye.
Yes, see
You
you.
too.
Stick around for a brief reading video capture device. This go away, this will go away. And then, how do I do that? Ah, that's what's going on. Okay. Accept. Hello. Just gonna finish with this. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. You are the salt of the earth. I wish you all a beautiful night, day, rest of your week. And episode 10, yeah, so it's going to be Acts and Luke. That's very long. It's a lot of readings. I'm not sure yet how the next month will look for me. I'm supposed to go on a trip, but traveling through the Middle East is going to be uncertain, that's for sure. And so perhaps in 3, maybe 4 weeks, it's happening anyway. And if you want to read along Luke and Acts, there's plenty to chew on for that. Today as well, you were welcome. Next episode, you'll be welcome to join the discussion if you enjoyed some of what was said today. If you want to, have something to say yourself and add that to the discussion, that would be wonderful too.